This show is about the challenge of teaching art in a classroom and the benefit of taking students to a museum, especially a world-class museum like the National Gallery of Art, which is less than an hour away from Montgomery College. My name is Julia Langley, and I teach art history at Montgomery College. The course we'll be following today is an Introduction to Art course for non-art majors. We look at the history of art, and we look at the ways in which artists make art that reflect the social, political, and personal issues of the day. Looking at art is an essential 21st century skill. As our culture becomes increasingly visual, with more and more information being conveyed over the internet, on television, with smartphones, and even at the movies, our students are reading less and looking more. But how are they learning to decipher what they see? My goal is to provide students with a toolkit that allows them to investigate images and think critically about what they see. I try and provide them with a visual vocabulary. In other words, I teach them to ask questions. The challenge is that doing this in a dark classroom with an illustrated lecture does not always work well. Reproductions are not the best way to look at art. In the classroom, a student can't see the actual details of an artwork or see the actual size, color, or texture of it. And let's face it, a dark classroom is not always the most exciting place for a student to be. The best place to learn about art is at an art museum. So during the fall semester, after an in-class introduction to the art of Roy Lichtenstein, my students and I headed down to the National Gallery of Art for an exhibition of Lichtenstein's work and to learn about seeing art up close. The National Gallery of Art was created in 1937 through a joint resolution of Congress. It began with the gift of financier Andrew Mellon's exceptional art collection. In 1941, the West Wing, designed by the architect John Russell Pope, opened to the public. In 1978, the East Wing of the gallery, a gift of Andrew Mellon's children, opened to the public in a building designed by I.M. Pei and Partners. The two buildings that make up the National Gallery are different in that the West Building shows art created up until around 1940. The East Building presents modern and contemporary art. In 1999, the Sculpture Garden was added to the National Gallery thanks to a gift from the Morris and Gwendolyn K. Fritz Foundation. It's important to note that both buildings and the Sculpture Garden are open 363 days of the year and are always free of charge. This is amazing. If you go to any other major museums in the United States, like the Metropolitan Museum of Art or the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, you'll be charged admission or asked for a suggested donation. But that is not so at the National Gallery, because the emphasis is on making the collections and the traveling exhibitions available to everyone. Many of my students had never been to an art museum before and didn't know what to expect. It took a leap of faith to move them out of their comfort zone and have them join me on a new adventure. The most difficult part is getting the students actually there. People tend to resist what they don't know. But I knew from experience that once the students stepped inside the East Wing of the National Gallery, they would relax. Part of the experience of going to a museum is stepping inside a building that has been thought through for the human experience. I.M. Pei designed the East Wing as a space for both expansion and contemplation in looking at art. So it's a really terrific environment to be in. To get my students engaged in looking at art, I could think of no better exhibition than one on the art of Roy Lichtenstein. His hallmarks, primary colors, comic book characters, and Ben-Day dots, are immediately intriguing. Many of the students had heard of Lichtenstein's work before and were familiar with some of the reproductions, but they had not been given the opportunity to really look at the work and think about what it meant, where it came from, and how Lichtenstein changed the way we see. To introduce my students to the exhibition, I asked Harry Cooper, the curator and head of the Department of Modern Art at the National Gallery, to meet with my students and talk a bit about what he does.
I am curator of modern art here at the National Gallery, and that means I am responsible in some way for the permanent collection, all of the paintings and sculpture we have from 1900 up to the present. So that's one aspect of the job, and the other main aspect is arranging, organizing, and bringing in special exhibitions like Roy Lichtenstein.
The majority of my students were born many years after Look Mickey was created. I asked Harry how he thought museums were relevant to today's young people.
One of the things that museums make us do is to think about another era. You know, it may or may not be relevant to our time, but I think the first thing to do is think about the time that they came from. You know, what was it like in the late 50s and early 60s in America? That was the beginning of our era. That was really, I think, after World War II, the beginning of this flood of images and commercial images, advertising that we live with. So we get to see the history of that.
Our tour of the exhibition began with my highlighting certain artworks and asking the group questions. But soon, the students began to point out what they wanted to see and learn about. Students began to question what they saw. Sometimes people assume that art should look a certain way. But to me, it's really all about finding new ways to communicate ideas. That's where critical thinking comes in. I try to get my students to think about general questions when they look at art, such as, how would you describe what you see in an artwork? What do you think it means, and why? In the case of Roy Lichtenstein, I also asked them to think about more general questions. What happens when you take a small image, like a cartoon, and blow the scale up large? How does that change the meaning of the image? What does it mean to appropriate an image? If Lichtenstein paints a replica of a Picasso, is the end result a Lichtenstein or a Picasso? The questions are endless, and whether there are correct answers or not is not really important. Learning to look comes from questioning what we see. When Roy Lichtenstein started out as a young painter, the art world was held in the thrall of the brash and bold abstract expressionists. Lichtenstein, along with Andy Warhol and others, turned away and began something new. Our visit to the gallery was very rewarding. By the time we came to the end of the tour, the students had gone from passive visitors to active instigators. Teaching is a vibrant profession. My goal is to help my students navigate a changing world by giving them transferable skills. The critical thinking involved in looking at and understanding art can be applied to any situation, occupation, or investigation. Plus, it's just a whole lot of fun. I felt very privileged to be able to bring my students here and show them a new and, I hope, defining experience. I asked Harry Cooper about the importance of bringing students to the museum, and this is his take.
If they've never been to a museum and never read any art history, they're very lucky because they are going to have a first experience. They don't know the rules, and I don't want to tell them the rules. I want them to come in and let the works work on them.
One of the reasons I love teaching at Montgomery College is because I have the opportunity to try new things and expand the boundaries of teaching. Taking the students from the classroom to the gallery was a success on many levels. The students had an authentic art experience and could see firsthand what a difference it makes to see art in person and not in reproduction. Students learned about the museum as a resource, a repository of knowledge, and a captivating place to visit on a more regular basis. Students saw what Roy Lichtenstein contributed to history with his art. And I hope students saw that looking at art can not only be instructive, but also really fun.